The line between use and abuse is both a practical and a moral boundary. Mathematics was introduced as a means of extending and enhancing our capacity to apply reason. But it has rapidly evolved into a means of replacing and inhibiting reason. Once it has been revealed that an established theory doesn't make sense, sophisticated mathematical constructs are now employed in order to conceal the evidence. But I have discovered that it is possible to sort out the underlying confusion by looking beneath the mathematics in order to closely examine the foundational concepts. Quote, "The intellect has a sharp eye for methods and tools, but is blind to ends and values. So it is no wonder that this fatal blindness is handed on from old to young, and today involves a whole generation." End quote. Albert Einstein. But what is my goal? The advantage of an outsider. As both an outsider and a dissenter, I am vulnerable to the inevitable attempts to impugn my credibility. But within the realm of philosophy, the validity of an argument never depends on the reputation of those who endorse it, or on the perceived credibility of the author who creates it. While it may be naive to think that this ideal is ever fully realized, it is still formally acknowledged that knowledge is the goal, and that everyone will strive to apply curiosity, critical thinking, and logic to the pursuit of knowledge. When engaging with philosophy, one is both encouraged and expected to use their own judgment, and also to understand both the structure and the function of a cogent argument. Despite these modest requirements, philosophy is an extraordinarily inclusive and accessible club. Truth, credibility, and authority. When science loses its connection to philosophy and becomes a mere branch of religion or of political doctrine, then the author of a statement begins to carry more weight than its content does. In other words, what is said becomes less important than who is saying it, with respect to determining whether or not a statement is to be regarded as credible. Science is perpetually situated somewhere between honest inquiry and manipulative dogma, and somewhere between liberty and authority. Is it possible to confer authenticity if you lack authenticity? My academic background is in philosophy, in psychology, and in economics, but not in physics. As my shift in focus towards theoretical physics came later in life, it was natural for me to pursue theoretical physics as a hobby rather than as a career. Having no established reputation or credentials in this subject matter, my credibility should be very close to nil. However, the approach to persuasion that I've adopted does not rely on the previously acquired credibility of the speaker. I would not expect my audience to accept any premise that I advance or any conclusion that I reach authoritatively. In fact, I hope that my audience will be both willing and able to apply their own judgment to the arguments that I present. I also assume that the reader has the benefit of a web browser and that they know how to use it for basic verification purposes. As the saying goes, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Upon reaching the end of this book, nobody should have any lingering doubts about the adequacy of my level of relevant expertise and knowledge in this subject matter, about my capacity to deal with it comprehensively, or about my commitment to accurately representing the current state of knowledge. For those who are already intimately familiar with theoretical physics, I expect that there will be a strong tendency to espouse and defend the established paradigm. To the extent that I dissent from the established paradigm, the standing presumption would be that I must have made some critical mistake along the way. It is always possible that I'm mistaken in some significant way, and mistakes are very common and easy in this rather difficult domain. But I think that it is reasonable for me to assume that if any hypothetical mistake cannot be identified and clearly articulated in English, then such a hypothetical mistake did not inform my reasoning. By contrast, it is relatively easy for me to precisely identify and articulate the mistakes that the current paradigm is founded on. And I submit that there is nothing unique about a mathematical understanding that makes such an understanding ineffable in principle. Meanwhile, for those who are relatively unfamiliar with theoretical physics, there will be a strong tendency to assume that I must be either misinterpreting or misrepresenting the state of the science in order to make my own positions look relatively reasonable. To some extent, oversimplification is inevitable, and it's also true that the more bombastic claims do tend to garner much more attention than they deserve. However, the driving force behind my arguments does not derive from the presentation of straw man positions. The controversies and the misconceptions that I will be presenting are very real and very deep, and we will be venturing as far as is necessary into the weeds in order to resolve them. Freedom, efficiency, motivation, and innovation. I consider myself to be fortunate that I did not study theoretical physics in a post-secondary academic setting. The natural approach to learning involves being guided by curiosity, and as an outsider, I can spend all of my time learning only about what I want to know. Additionally, I can always try to come up with answers to my own questions before I'm presented with the official answer, and often I found that there's a fertile divergence between my own answer and the official answer. Learning independently has also given me more time to think. If I need to take 3 years just to think about a problem, then I can actually do that. Organic learning does not follow any timeline or syllabus. In fact, in preparing these books, I've probably spent at least 80% of my time in thought and less than 20% of it in reading and in writing. This would not be possible in an academic context where the majority of my time would have been spent with reading and writing. Knowledge of reality is like a buffet, and as an outsider, I have the freedom to choose what I put on my plate. My interest in physics is focused on the problems that haven't been solved, and on the questions that haven't been answered. I don't think that it would be possible to accomplish what I've done here from within the confines of academia. There may be exceptional cases, but I think that in general, it is only outside of academia that one can retain the freedom to pursue their own intellectual interests. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. I am fully aware of the fact that most of the problems that I've been working on have remained unsolved for more than 100 years. Therefore, I have also felt no great sense of urgency. If a problem can remain unsolved for 100 years, then surely it can remain unsolved for another 20 years. There is something extraordinarily comforting and satisfying about the feeling that you have, for all intents and purposes, infinite time to work on a particular problem. And yet, I've also been comforted by the fact that I didn't need to wait some arbitrary period of time in order to study whatever it was that I was inspired to learn. I can always skip ahead to the fun stuff or to whatever it is that I'm curious about, while I am still genuinely curious about it. I can learn whatever I want to know in a way that is responsive to my own organic demand for knowledge. Imagine that an authority had told you that you must first demonstrate that you've memorized the first 2,000 digits of pi before you are ready to learn more about transcendental numbers. In that case, I hope that you would react with skepticism. Memorizing the first 2,000 digits of pi is quite an impressive intellectual achievement, which could potentially require that you devote anywhere from 2 months to 2 years of your time to this single goal. And yet, the purpose of this exercise has nothing to do with enhancing knowledge of the subject matter. The real purpose of this exercise is to waste valuable time and to weed out those who are unable or unwilling to memorize an extreme quantity of self-evidently useless information. This rote memorization exercise also serves as a potent deterrent for those who are not fully committed to a given career path. As an added bonus, those who complete the program will be able to easily demonstrate their superior grasp of pi to anyone who has doubts about their expertise. Those who have demonstrated their extensive knowledge of pi might also decide that anyone who cannot recite the first 2,000 digits of pi backwards from memory couldn't have anything of value to contribute to any serious discussion about transcendental numbers or about mathematics in general. It could also be tacitly accepted that if anyone is going to revolutionize our understanding of the irrational numbers, then this would have to be someone who had, at a minimum, managed to memorize the first 12,000 digits of pi in order to distinguish themselves and to demonstrate their superiority. The scenario above is intended as a caricature to illustrate one of the common ways in which an intellectual environment can become competitive in a dysfunctional way. Nobody who values efficiency, productivity, or innovation would voluntarily subject themselves to such stifling standards, nor would they pay a small fortune for the privilege. If this caricature looks familiar, then my point is made. While I don't think that it is impossible for authentic enlightenment to emerge from within the current academic establishment, I do think that it is extremely improbable. In summary, being an outsider means that I have several unfair advantages. I don't have arbitrary deadlines for progress. I have more time to explore specific ideas and to apply critical thinking. I'm not required to jump through hoops or to memorize vast amounts of irrelevant or redundant information. I haven't been studying for the sole purpose of passing exams. I'm not subject to the publish or perish principle. I haven't been required to pretend to believe anything. And I haven't squandered years of my precious time and a fortune in tuition money. Most importantly, though, being an outsider means that I have not been required to adopt and espouse conventional thinking with my professional career and reputation hanging in the balance. I have the freedom to be honest and to contradict beliefs which have somehow become sacrosanct. Freedom, efficiency, and motivation are all important ingredients for successful innovation, and all of these ingredients are much easier for outsiders such as myself to gain access to. To judge a book by its publicity. The only cost of not being a credentialed academic physicist comes in the form of a superficial and decadent form of credibility. But as I have said, this type of credibility shouldn't be relevant to those who are already open-minded enough to begin reading. The arguments that I will present really do speak for themselves, and I submit that it would be very difficult to read this book in full and to still entertain doubts about my competence with reasoning, my integrity, or my familiarity with the relevant subject matter. To illustrate my point, imagine that you publish the most controversial book in the world. Nobody is on the fence, and everyone has formed a strong opinion about your book. All of those who have read your book love it, and all of those who hate your book wouldn't even consider reading it. Your fans typically say that your book gives them comfort and clarity, and it articulates what they had long suspected, but had been afraid to acknowledge publicly. Those who hate your book would consider the act of reading your book to be wrong, for a variety of reasons, and yet they have also read quite a lot about your book. Many of your fans are afraid to admit to having read your book to their friends due to fear of ostracism. Your detractors attack both you and your fans at a personal level, rather than addressing the content of the book. It is quite an accomplishment for all of your readers to love your book, and yet your detractors still outnumber your supporters. This is the sort of dynamic that occurs when science is overwhelmed by politics and by the dark art of public relations. If this book is to be controversial, and it should be, then the controversy would be a contest between the opinions of those who have read the book and the opinions of those who refuse to read it. As long as my readers appreciate this book and are moved by the arguments herein, then that is all that matters to me. If something will establish my reputation and credibility with respect to the topic of quantum mechanics, then it will be the power of the ideas that are presented in these pages. Summoning the Dragon. Even though all physicists would presumably know the basics of relativity and of quantum mechanics well enough to write either an introductory textbook or a similar product that is geared towards a general audience, very few of them do. This seemingly humble role has been reserved as a special rite of passage for the most revered wizards of the profession. And why not? A novice would naturally prefer to learn about physics from a highly skilled expert who has already risen up through the ranks to attain a celebrity status and a cult following. Why would anyone want to learn about the basics from a random stranger? My reason for writing about the foundations of relativity and of quantum mechanics is unique. I'm not posing as a tenured wizard of physics by any means. My objective is not merely to teach the fundamentals, but to draw attention to precisely what is wrong with the fundamentals so that deeply rooted misconceptions can be corrected. Physics is dead, and it has been dead for my entire life. My goal is to revive physics. I've also come to view myself as a semi-welcome arsonist. As such, my plan is to ignite the torch of enlightenment, set all of the dead wood ablaze, and fan the flames of rejuvenation.